light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Time is often viewed as if it were a constant within human life, and yet I think there was one episode of Star Trek Voyager where they toyed with the idea of what if time is not the same for everyone in the universe? What if there are planets where time moves more quickly? And it was kind of fascinating to consider, and yet it challenges philosophical and spiritual and religious definitions of the meaning of life, because some lives will be so brief and some will be so long. And is it fair? Is it supposed to be fair? Why are we so concerned about fairness? And part of me answers that with what I had in a previous show once, where I said it's not life's job to be fair, it's ours. In finding ways to be fair, we bring out the virtues and the godliness, if you will, within ourselves. We develop ourselves into having a respect for how interdependent and interconnected the web of life is. With that in mind, this one Star Trek episode showing people who lived on a planet where time went very fast, and people in space where time went much slower. Shifting that back to just our planet Earth, there are so many different species on the planet. Probably the one I'm the most aware of is my dogs, and especially my service dog, because the usual expectation is that a person will outlive their pets. In most cases, that seems to prove to be true. But that means that in my human lifetime, I will go through a succession of service dogs. And I recall reading somewhere where someone asked rhetorically, or asked in a public sort of discussion, what's the hardest thing about having pets? And the knowledgeable, wise person responded, the goodbyes. Because every puppy or kitten that you see come into life, there's a good chance that you will be there to see it go out again as well, because they don't live as long. In a sense, time for them is spinning much, much faster. In a sense, they experience time as the context at the same rate that we do. It's not like they're moving in slow motion and they think we're moving so fast that they can't keep track of us. We're both moving within the same sort of reference of time, but for them, being 10 years old may be the equivalent of being 70 years old for us, for human beings. And in that sense, they don't have as much time to get everything done, to fit it all in. They don't have as much time to fall in love, to form relationships, to have progeny, to experience all there is to experience about life, and then also cope with the ways that their bodies are wearing out, and what can be done along the way to make their bodies last as long and be as strong as possible, but even in the best case scenario, still running out of time, I guess one could say. As an autistic, I don't think in terms of years, I think in terms of 525,600 minutes. It's like each moment is a detail all its own, and details are the first reality, and the generalities come second or not at all. So I don't know if I even think in terms of years as much as I think in terms of minutes, and moments of transition, and moments of discovery and experience. And what I experience in a week's time for a neurotypical may be unbelievably overwhelming, because it would be way too much data for them to process. So in one sense, I'm processing more data, but in another sense, because I'm processing more, on the outside it looks like I'm processing less because it takes longer, because there's no way to see on the outside how many simultaneous processes are going on within my head. For a neurotypical person, there is a natural tendency to filter out background noise and not pay attention to it. An autistic person may not always be able to do that. So, I was at a meeting not too long ago, and the air conditioning system was rumbling, and nobody else was paying any attention to it, but because my ears were picking it up so much, and I was hearing this rumble, 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 I had a hard time understanding the words that people were articulating, because it was as if they were having to, or like they would have had to speak over an enormous amount of traffic noise out on the street. But of course, for all of them, they didn't hear the rumble because they weren't paying attention to that part. They could filter the sound and hear only the voice they wanted to hear. I needed to have them speak over the other sound in order to hear clearly what they said. My 2 cents worth if you ever have to give a speech in a gymnasium, because it is so loud and there is so much echo, I've tried to tell people that if you slow your speech and put a brief pause between your words, it will allow the echo the reverberation to stop so that the words don't overlap. And when that happens, your audience will understand what you are saying much, much better. But if you talk at a normal speed, there is so much echo in the auditorium that one word is overlapping the other, and the echo keeps going, and an entire paragraph can sound like one long word, which is it's completely unintelligible. You can't understand it at all. So I'm hoping that when I record my shows, I speak with sufficient enunciation and pace my words enough that I'm not overlapping them too much. But if you are ever in a situation where you have to speak where there's a lot of echo or a lot of background noise or anything else that is competing with your voice, and you still want to be heard, one of the ways you can increase that is by putting tiny split-second pauses between your words. Because when the words are not overlapping, it is easier for the listener to recognize exactly which word you said. But a lot of people don't or haven't demonstrated that sort of conscientious attitude or that sort of awareness that their words are not being completely understood. But coming back to the subject of time and how it is experienced differently, and is it a long life or a short life? Is it a tedious life or an exciting one? And I'm reminded of that quote, and I'm probably not going to remember it exactly, from the movie Steel Magnolias, where Julia Roberts and Sally Fields are talking, Shelby and Malin, and Shelby's comment is something like, I would rather have 5 minutes of wonderful. I would rather have 5 minutes of wonderful than a lifetime of nothing special, because Malin is disagreeing with her about choosing to have a baby because it puts a strain on her physiology because of her diabetes. And she does wind up dying in the movie, and Steel Magnolias has come out enough years ago that I would like to think everyone's seen it by now. If you haven't seen it, do see it. Just knowing what I just said will not be enough to spoil it for you, because there is so much in that movie that is so quotable and fun and interesting, and yet it's a very common sense look at life in all of its frailty, in all of its potential, and there is so much that can be learned from the relationships demonstrated by the women in that movie. And for that matter, from any relationship. There is so much to learn from our relationships, but like the words spoken too quickly, if the relationships overlap too much and we don't hear one as distinct from the others, an awful lot of understanding doesn't get conveyed. It's confused, it's mixed in with too many other things, and we don't learn everything that we could. all that being said, and whatever experience of time one is having, the point of a physical human body is, as Captain Picard said in Star Trek The Next Generation, we have to deal with the fact that our time in the universe is finite, that at some point this physical body will run out of time, and there won't be any more time to do what needs to be done. During the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s, that was something that I heard from a lot of my friends who ultimately died of AIDS, that for them there was no tomorrow. It wasn't an endless string of tomorrows they could rely on. They had a limited amount of time, a very limited amount of time, and they had to make very good use and very efficient use of that time and of their energy, because there wasn't an inexhaustible amount. They, we'll do it tomorrow, we don't have time for it today, is not something that a lot of people who were HIV positive or who ultimately died of AIDS could say. They couldn't plan on tomorrow. It might not be there. And so they had to take what moments they had and make them as special and as packed full of experience as possible. I recall reading in a book, I think it was one of the books by Madeleine L'Engle, who is most known for her book A Wrinkle in Time. But of her books, the 4 books of hers that I liked the most, one was Walking on Water, Reflections on Faith and Art. And then there was a series of 3 books she did called the Crosswicks Trilogy. And I think it was The Irrational Season and The Summer of the Great Grandmother, and I can't quite remember what the 3rd one was. But in one of these books, she talked about someone, I believe it was her, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but either way, the lesson stands. Someone was talking with her mother and burst into tears and said, I envy you, I envy you. You've had a horrible life, but you've really lived. And I think we need to pause for a moment and figure out what that means. One of the quotes attributed to Helen Keller, and see if I can remember the whole thing now. It ends with the more quoted, life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. I think it starts out with, security is mostly a fiction and does not exist among men, nor do the children of men typically experience it. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. I think that was the whole quote, if I remember correctly now. But she's basically saying that those who are reaching for security all the time and always wants to play it safe, that their lives will go by, they'll run out of time, and as Henry David Thoreau said in the book Walden, coming to the point of death and realizing that you've never lived. And having that awareness, this woman saying to the author's mother, I envy you, you've really lived. You've had a horrible life, but you've really lived. In the play Our Town, in the 3rd act, Emily essentially asks the narrator at one point, does anyone know they live while they do it? And the narrator responds, no, well, poets and saints maybe. Because to be a poet or a saint requires above average levels of awareness, looking at something and seeing its details and its pieces and parts and what it means within time. That by the time I experience old age, many service dogs will have helped me through life and we've had to say goodbye and they're gone. And I will miss every single one of them, I'm sure. I miss the dogs that I've already had to say goodbye to. And it's a heart-wrenching sort of thing to go through that, saying goodbye after growing to love another creature so much. And yet, if I don't accept the pain of the goodbyes, I will never experience the joy of growing into a loving relationship with them, and knowing their joy and their enthusiasm whenever I come home or come into the room. just the importance of being with me every moment and of making sure that I'm okay, even while I make sure that they're okay. It's a very symbiotic relationship. They help me cope, and I help them cope. They have no way of understanding the absolutely crazy world of humanity, and I have difficulty coping with the crazy world of humanity without their help. And together we form this symbiotic relationship where together we can do it. Together we can make enough sense of this to be around long enough to do as much good as we can while there is opportunity. But not wasting those opportunities, because at some point there won't be any more time. No matter how you measure time, there is always a point at which there's no time left. It comes and it goes, and every single wonderful thing that can happen can become a wondrous memory that inspires and empowers and grants vision and ingenuity. But as quickly as the moment can happen, it is gone into the past. On my first album, I wrote a song I was a very young man at the time when I wrote this song, but I was contemplating the overlappingness of time, I guess, the sense in which every person is an intersection of past, present, and future. We carry memories, we carry visions, and we exist in a present moment that is gone as fast as we can name it. Now it's this time. Oops, now it's another time. Now it's another time. As fast as I can say what time it is, the time is gone, and it's now a different name for the time again. In creating this song, I wanted to invite people to embrace a greater awareness of why it is that we need to make the present moment special, to make the present moment a present to ourselves and a present to everyone around us, a gift to ourselves and a gift to everyone around us. And so the chorus of the song, and I'll explain it afterwards, but because it's a little bit of a not a tongue twister, but mentally trying to think of jumping between the perspectives. But as I wrote this chorus and tried to express it to people, how many people didn't want to take the time for contemplation and apply the insight that the song was attempting to convey so that they could get more treasure and more value out of their present moments. The chorus is expressed from the point of view of an elderly person within the song, who has had this incredible long life experience, and being elderly, looking back on youth and trying to convey what has been learned, but nobody will listen. And so the chorus goes, though nobody hears me, and they don't understand that tomorrow is yesterday, still here in our hands. Let's cherish this moment now as it slips away. So when you are lonely, remember today. The present moment saturated with love becomes something worth remembering. The future moment that is approaching can be anticipated, and that future moment is where we will make the memory that we will have after the present moment. If, for example, I plan to do something next week on Tuesday, and I plan to make it a day of love and celebration, and to spend the time with loved ones and with someone about whom I deeply care. Perhaps I've always said that when I get back to having my own house again, I'm going to establish a ritual that after supper, every single night when I'm home, there will be a half hour where I go out in the yard a fenced yard for my dogs, and for half an hour we do nothing but throw the ball or throw the stick or whatever it is they want to play with. And they have my undivided attention of us playing together for at least a half hour after supper every single night, because they're not going to be around forever. It's the sense in which that memory that we're making in that moment, planning to do it in the future so that when it becomes past, I have that to remember. So that, with my Old English sheepdog who has now passed, that I have the memory of going jogging with him almost every day, or at least 3 times a week at the very least, and how he looked forward to that and knew the route, and even if I forgot to put the leash on, he would follow the exact route because he was so accustomed to following the routine. And yet anytime, as long as he could be around me, everything was fine with the world. He never had a care in the world as long as he was with me. And if I had to go somewhere for a trip or something and I came back 2 or 3 days later, he was so excited and so happy that he couldn't keep himself from barking. And he never barked the rest of the time because it was a bit overwhelming for me, but I allowed it for 5 minutes when I would come home because he couldn't contain himself. He was so overjoyed to see me again and to be with me again. The only thing that mattered to him was being with me. But going back to the song I just sang, that it's planning that tomorrow so that it will be the yesterday I want to remember. Tomorrow is yesterday still here in my hands, where I can shape it and mold it and decide how it is going to be and how much time I'm going to give to throwing the ball or going hiking with my dogs or whatever it is that they want to do. We had this wonderful ritual that I did occasionally where I had a hammock in the backyard, and it was this wonderfully, wonderfully fun time that anytime I would lay in the hammock, my Old English sheepdog would want to climb into the hammock on top of me and lick my face. And it was just a moment of complete joy and love for each other. And of course the hammock is tipping and swaying and swinging, and he's got all 4 feet out and spread as wide as possible, trying not to tip off the hammock, while he's kind of laying right on my stomach and licking my face. And it was a way of us being together that was totally playful and totally fun and totally about unconditional love for each other. Unfortunately, at the present time, I don't have a hammock anymore. I hope that someday maybe I will be blessed with a home again, and there will be a hammock. And when the time is right, perhaps somebody will give me an Old English sheepdog puppy. I always seem to do better with males than females, if anybody remembers this in the future and wants to give me a sheepdog puppy. But for the moment, I'm because of having autism and being kind of marginalized by the world, I'm living in a subsidized housing situation, and I'm developing myself in terms of doctoral study, hoping that if I can finish a doctoral degree, I can become a college professor, I can have an income, and I can leave the whole purgatory of subsidized housing behind. People who live in subsidized housing really deserve more support and more compassion than they're getting, because it is really so not a perfect system, and there are a number of civil rights that are compromised when you're in that situation, and they need to know that somebody still cares about them and loves them, because living without love and being shuffled from this compartment to that compartment, or you get these rights because we said so and you can't do this because we said so, how does someone in that situation keep their dreams alive? And how do they take the time that they have and transform it into something so much more empowering? And it's not easy. Boy, is it not easy. It comes down to loving each other enough to make the time that anyone has count, to make my dog's time count, to make my time count, to make that person in need, to make their time count, to make the homeless person's time count. How can someone be in a homeless situation and somehow have experiences with others that give them vision and hope that life will not always be this way. Some place secure to go, some place where love still lives. That, like the biblical verse, I was homeless and you gave me shelter. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. Responding to each other's needs with at least as much compassion as we would want to receive if, heaven forbid, we are ever in that situation. Everyone seems to think that it will never happen to them, and then it does, and they're totally shocked, and by the time they recover from the shock, there is no one left to help them, and no one left to ask, and nothing left to do to get out of the rigged system that keeps them poor from that point on. It's really quite tragic, but it is not insurmountable if people will remember to love. And in loving, remember to hold each other accountable and to be honest and truthful with each other. We need to make the time count. We need to make the love count. We need to embrace the wisdom and love and truth that will make life a wonderful experience for absolutely every person. Thank you very much for watching. I hope my words have been helpful to you during the last half hour. Blessings, love, and peace to you now and always.